My name is Hillary Matchett. I'm the Chief Investment Officer for Quantum Coast Capital. I am delighted to be here with not only coworkers, colleagues, friends, but a great, great panel to talk about U.S. policy and how we all as citizens and Americans need to really look at what's going on in the industry, what the federal government is doing, what our workforce development will look like, where our educators are putting their alliances, etc. I want to first go down the line very quickly and have everyone introduce themselves and their area of focus when it comes to U.S. policy, and then we will dive right in.
Hi, good morning. My name's Lamont Silves. I'm Head of Government Solutions for IonQ.
Hi, Allison Schwartz. I'm Head of Global Government Relations for a company called D-Wave.
Morning, everyone. My name is Ryan McKenney. I'm the Director of Government Relations and General Counsel of Compliance at Quantinuum.
Good morning. My name is Bill Shepard. I'm a partner at Holland Knight here in Palm Beach, but I'm part of our quantum team at Holland Knight run out of DC.
Good morning. I'm Paul Parazzoli, and I lead the public sector strategic engagements for IBM Quantum.
Excellent. So I want to just frame a little bit of time that we've got, and we'll try and keep it short because we could talk for hours, even days. We're so excited to share what we know. We'll try and keep it punchy, but the outline is effectively going to follow what our federal strategy is, how we need to look at this from a national security standpoint, where innovation and scaling will be seen and when that timeline is looking like, regulation and policy, global competition, and then workforce industry readiness. We've heard a lot from Marco and others about the exciting things that are going on at IonQ, why we need to pay attention to all of these things, what we're doing in the county, but we really want to make sure that we invoke a lot of emotion with everybody here. Everything from empowerment, curiosity, information exchange to fear, and why we need to pay attention and what we need to do as a community and as a government, right? So, Bill, I want to start with you down there. Sorry, I'm going to be leaning a little bit. Can you give us just a quick snapshot overview as to where we are right now with U.S. policy, perhaps even starting with a letter that was dated, I think, September 2nd to the current administration?
Sure. So let me, before that, tell you how I felt when I sat in the audience playing with Legos, and I heard somebody say, how fantastic that in 3 years we could break RSA codes. Well, as somebody who spent 15 years in law enforcement, that is terrifying to me. And that's why this is a time where the U.S. government really needs to step up. We saw the generals and admirals who gathered together in Quantico, and people talked about what a security risk that might be for our nation. It's rooms like this where there are quantum experts who gather together all in one place that really are on the front lines of that and also pose a similar, different, but similar risk. Because this is a race that our country needs to win, and we need to work on it together. And to do that, Congress and the President need to work together, as they've indicated that it seems that they will, to reauthorize the quantum initiative, to focus on the important parts of the science that we're talking about here today, but also to work beyond the national labs, to fund work that is throughout the ecosystem of quantum, and frankly, to be a buyer, to show the market that there are consumers out there, that the federal government is one of the most important consumers in that, and to really lead the way on performance-driven initiatives, I think, much more so than sort of specific targets. Tell us where you want to go, let industry go there, and then buy lots of it to support the growth throughout the industry. And I think that's what Congress and the President will hopefully be working on together when they follow the Florida and Palm Beach model and get back to work.
Wow, drop the mic moment. Thank you, Bill. All right, Ryan, can you follow up on that one? As somebody who's focusing on policy at the corporate level, where is the federal funding aligned or mismatched with where we are on the initiatives?
Sure. So we've seen a huge increase in investment across the public and private sectors in quantum the last 3-4 years. There's been $42 billion of public sector money globally into quantum, and obviously more than that on the private sector as well. The U.S. government, a lot of this has been focused at the Department of Energy, the DOE, And the National Quantum Initiative that Bill mentioned before was signed by then President Trump during his first term in 2018. That put somewhere around $1.2 billion towards quantum across the federal government. And at the time, in 2018, the U.S. was by far the leader. There was no question that the U.S. had the most money spent towards quantum and had the most advanced research and development at the time. A lot has changed since 2018 in a variety of ways at the geopolitical level, at the investment level, and we've seen huge advancements from quantum companies, from hardware, middleware, and software, such that you can't really find a roadmap for any quantum company that's here today or in the world where we're not talking about commercialization, fault tolerance, in real applications in the next couple of years, if they're not here already, certainly by the end of the decade. So the US government, unfortunately, in 2023, 2 years now, the National Quantum Initiative Act was due to be reauthorized, and we are now 2 years into this process waiting to be reauthorized. Obviously, I don't know if y'all have heard, but the government is shut down at the moment, so this is going to continue to be delayed further and further. We've got to get this reauthorized. That is by far the most important piece. The draft of the reauthorization bill will have about $2.7 billion across the federal government, and it's pushing for commercialization. To the point that Bill made, government as a buyer, government as a co-designer with quantum companies is absolutely key. And to reauthorize that is the first step that we can take towards further domestic policy and making sure the U.S. keeps and advances all of the progress that has been made. In the meantime, and I know we'll talk about this more later, let me just say that states and even cities are taking the lead since the U.S. federal government has kind of honestly not made a ton of progress at the federal level. Still, obviously, federal programs super important, but this is a really key area, and we're seeing cities and states jump into the void, and obviously that's why we're here today, because Florida and Palm Beach are doing that.
Terrific, thank you. Paul, IBM has been doing a lot with national labs and federal agencies. Which are the sort of most critical in your lens right now today, agencies that are sort of in programs that are the most that we need to look at? So whether it be DARPA or DOE or NIST standards, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, so there's there are probably two flagship funding programs in the United States for quantum. One, first, as was mentioned before, is the National Quantum Initiative. And that funds programs at the Department of Energy, NSF, as well as DARPA. The DOE takes the lion's share of that funding. And then the other one is sorry, did I say DARPA? So the other one is QBI, the Quantum Benchmark Initiative, right? And that's it's a smaller amount of money, but that has the intention, the goal of sort of validating and verifying the quantum computing technology as something that might be viable in the future. Obviously, NQI, as my colleagues here had brought up, that is the most critical infrastructure or funding bill for quantum that this nation needs. And I would say, though, despite how important NQI and the QBI initiatives are, one of the things that these initiatives don't do, as Bill had mentioned, is we need this demand signal from the government to pare down the risk that the private industry and venture capital are making in the U.S. To build quantum computing technologies, right? And so these are the two big flagship funding programs. But we do also need additional support from the government in other programs to ensure that all the investment that private sector is making gets acquired in the future.
Thank you. Allison, question for you. Okay, so D-Wave has been working with some of the federal agencies, right, on working with both the hardware and the software side of the industry with quantum. Can you highlight some of the dual focus areas where the policy is helping or hindering the progress?
Sure, happy to. So one thing, just for clarification, there are different types of qubit architectures. There are different types of quantum computing modalities. And the NQI and the DARPA Quantum Benchmarking Initiative is only really focused on one. which is called gate model systems. D-Wave is building gate model as well as quantum annealers. The quantum annealers are great for optimization problems, and we're working with Army Research Labs in Biloxi, and they are building applications to address wildfire management, how to do fuel break lines more efficiently to prevent that cascading wildfire. They're also looking at, earlier today there was a talk about can quantum computing help with getting grids more resilient? They actually looked at cascading grid failures and utilizing quantum annealing technology. So the major government programs are looking at the hardware, not the software in the US. That's not the case internationally. And we have some really innovative thinkers, both within the government as well as in the commercial side, of how to utilize the technology today. We don't have to wait until 5 years from now or 10 years from now to start building those applications. Those are being built today, and they're cloud accessible. So for those in the audience who haven't tried out quantum yet, any one of our companies, we're here to talk to you because there is a lot of stuff that you can do today with the technology.
Terrific, thank you. So now I'm going to move into national security. And Lamont and Ryan, I'm going to ask you sort of a two-part question, and you can play off of one another, depending on who wants to answer. I know we've done this before. With legal and policy expertise that you both have in quantum and cybersecurity, is the US government preparing for the risk that a mature quantum computer could break the current encryption systems? We just heard about all of that from Marco, and I want to hear a little bit more of what you think. Second part is that from the hardware side, how do you see these systems being hardened for supply chain and other sorts of policy reform?
You want to go first?
Sure, I can start. So I'm a cybersecurity attorney by trade before getting into quantum, and so I'll just echo what Bill said, is that it is scary that quantum will break public key encryption at some point in the fairly near future. That is a national security issue. That is an economic security issue. It is an issue that every single company that has high-value data will face. And I think as an industry, we do ourselves no favors by trying to act like that threat doesn't exist, because there's a lot of folks in the US federal government and otherwise, and even if you just read the popular press, the only thing you may know about quantum is that scary part. You may know that China has invested 15 to 20 billion in quantum. You may know that it will break public key encryption. And so it's very important to, one, address it, say, yes, that is absolutely a threat, that does exist. Obviously, the reason all of us got into quantum is the wonderful use cases, the faster drug discovery, the new material science, the chance to do things that no current classical computer can do, and to assist AI for humanity for good. But the threat does exist. The US government is absolutely aware of this threat, and for 10 years now, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, has been putting together what they call PQC, post-quantum cryptography algorithms, that they standardized last year to protect against a future quantum attack. So the US government is moving towards this. There have been numerous national security memoranda for the White House. There are laws in place pushing the US federal government to move their systems to these PQC algorithms before 2035. But it's a very long and arduous process. And the attorney in me says, this is there's a ton of liability, and you've got to start this process today. It is not a light switch that you can just say, oh good, we're quantum safe. It is going to be a decades-long process of digging through your encryption systems, of implementing these new algorithms, and iterating them over a long period of time through what we call cryptographic agility. It's not an easy process, and at some point there will be huge data breaches from quantum. That's why a lot of folks care about it from a national security perspective. And then before I turn it over to Lamont, I'd just like to say that quantum, although that is obviously very scary, quantum is part of the solution. There are technologies called quantum key distribution and quantum random number generators, where alongside the PQC algorithms that I mentioned for NIST, quantum is absolutely part of the solution. It is absolutely the sword that will break public key encryption, but it is also part of a shield for longer-term, better cybersecurity over the coming decades.
So we understand very well, I think, that there's quite a threat. We've talked about it. You've heard it from a number of different speakers. We're determined to be not just part of the problem, but more importantly, part of the solution. All of us collectively believe that quantum technology offers a big part of that solution. Now, to your question, Hillary, about getting the federal government engaged, I think we all recognize fairly well that when the United States marshals its resources, we're incredibly good at hitting the 25-meter target. Where we struggle is going after the 100-meter target. And up until relatively recently, the government sort of put this threat at the 100-meter range, and more recently are recognizing that, in fact, it's not 100 meters out, it's 25 meters out. And so I think we're going to begin to see a lot more resources devoted to this, but there definitely needs to be more attention paid to it, because if we're really good at hitting a 25-meter target, we're especially good at responding to events after they happen. And with quantum technology, the key is to be in front of this event, not behind it. So that's one thing I would say. From Florida's perspective, I know that we have the 12 universities from the state university system here. I'm a Florida resident, and I'm sure many of you are asking, where's the opportunity here for us? The opportunity is in preparing a workforce that will attract these kinds of hardware, software, and algorithm development efforts to the state. That's critical. More than real estate, more than tax breaks, more than all of that, what companies like us and others that will be emerging in this field need is a deep bench of talent that we can access. So if you're wondering where's the opportunity for Florida, it's in thinking through what that deep bench of talent looks like that can respond to these threats.
You and I had a panel maybe 2 months ago, and you stated a statistic about the graduates of PhDs. Can you share that with this group?
Sure. So here's a little Q&A. Roughly 330 million Americans. How many PhDs in quantum physics do U.S. universities graduate every year that are U.S. citizens? Not from other countries, but U.S. citizens, and consequently people who could be cleared at the secret and top secret level. Anybody want to shout out a number? Wow.
I heard 110, 5 came up in the hand. Those are really low numbers. What is it?
So the average over the last several years is 48 people.
48.
So if you wanted a quantum physicist to tackle some of these problems, now, granted, as we commercialize this technology, IonQ as an example, we hire lots of different kinds of people, right? We hire software engineers, we hire product engineers, and all of that. But to push the science forward, we still continue to use quantum physicists. There are 48. IonQ employs probably 3 to 4 years of the U.S. production in U.S. citizens that are quantum physicists. We've got a gap, and we have to fill it.
Staggering. All right, I know I'm way behind on our time, so Allison, I'm just going to jump right to you. We talked about the security side of systems. Are there uses of quantum technology to solve national security that you think specifically is something that this group and Florida should be knowledgeable about?
Absolutely. I mean, I think you've heard from other folks about the commercialization focused, and as these technologies and as these hardwares start to advance, you're able to actually create what's called a hybrid application. So you use a hybrid solver, it'll break a problem down, be able to send part of the problem to an HPC, the other part of the problem to a quantum processing unit. And in those are some amazing abilities to solve really difficult problems. We have a customer that's based out in Huntsville, Alabama, called Davidson. They built a missile defense application that looked at a notional attack on Hawaii, and it looked at multiple ballistic missiles, taking into account solar flares, rain, degradation. 67 million scenarios were looked at and provided an answer back in 13 seconds. That's the power of quantum, being able to look at that huge amount of scenarios and provide an answer back in a time that's necessary. So from a national security perspective, obviously we hear a lot about Golden Dome. Missile defense can come in there. Responses for emergencies, that is another area where you have to look at so many different scenarios. In Japan, they've built applications to evacuate tsunami evacuation routes. That's obviously critically important to the state of Florida as you're looking at hurricane relief and where do you position it. A new new application that just came out of the UK is with North Wales Police. And how do you actually pre-position the police force so that they can respond in a better amount of time? That's actually something that's critically important too, both at a state, federal, and national level. So there's a lot of these national security areas where quantum can be part of the solution and be able to build and address problems that we never thought we could address.
Terrific, and I think that that's where we get this emotion, right? We get a little bit of fear, but then we get the inspiration as to where the good can come from the tech. All right, I want to move into innovation and scaling, and Paul, you're down at the end. So IBM has been pushing together, lab to industry commercialization. Where are the key gaps in this pipeline? Whether it's picks and shovels, workforce development, you tell me. How can we prepare ourselves for what you're seeing?
Yeah, I think, well, the most obvious gap, as mentioned by Monty, is talent, workforce development, right? That's a critical component. So when you're talking about getting innovation out of universities and the labs and into commercialization, into the private sector, I'd break it down to 3 broad categories. Perhaps there's talent development first, or talent availability. Then there's funding. To commercialize, and then there's access to the resources that you need to develop. And so, one statistic that the QEDC Quantum Economic Development Consortium published earlier this year was there are 7,000 unfilled jobs in quantum technology daily. So we produce 48. It's going to take us a while to get to 7,000. And then they also cited that by like 2030 or mid-2030s, in the Midwest sector of the U.S. alone, there'll be 170 to 190,000 quantum technology jobs. So again, it's going to take quite a bit of effort to ramp up production of workforce to meet that demand, and that's just in one sector of one country, right? So there's a lot of opportunity there for universities, post-university training, high school, community college, adoption and stuff. So there's a strong need there, and then funding-wise, we have these really great programs in the U.S., the SBIR and STTR grants, and these are basically America's seed funding for innovation, and they're a big contributor to pushing innovation. Taking innovation from labs and universities and bringing them into the private sector, and I think soon in the next couple of years, we're going to see those organizations increasing their investments in quantum. I think having stronger direction from the administration that this is where they should be putting their investments in would be helpful. And then lastly, access to quantum resources. If you want to be developing quantum applications or quantum algorithms, you need to have access to quantum computers, especially when you're talking about utility scale systems. 5 years ago, you could have gotten away with simulating quantum computers on classical hardware, but today, with the size of computers that we have, they're no longer classically simulatable. It's impossible. They're too complex at this point. And that's been a deficit that we've seen for many years. Some institutions like Oak Ridge National Lab and Lawrence Berkeley National Lab provide access to researchers to be able to develop on quantum systems, but we need a lot more of that, and we need that to be spread out to more, to other areas beyond the labs, right? To the universities and to the startup community and to industry.
So maybe Lamont, Allison, Ryan, Bill, can you expand on that a little bit? If I'm sitting in the audience and I'm a parent with a young child, or I'm an educator at the middle school level, at the university level, in the postgraduate schools, what are the types of roles beyond just a quantum physicist that will be needed, and the workforce that we can build now, even here in our backyard, that will place in these wonderful jobs that support this ecosystem? Because this is a very large ecosystem, and I think most people feel like if I don't have a PhD, or I'm not, in my prerequisite courses freshman year, I'm never going to be able to apply. Talk to me a little bit about what you see, very briefly, of the gaps in maybe where people expect these roles to be.
So this is going to be across the board, right? We talked about quantum physicists and what's necessary to do that, but there are so many other roles that are part of this ecosystem. And I would include in that people like application engineers, the folks who work at the intersection between a business requirement and what a quantum computer can do and develop those algorithms that are necessary to use our hardware. There are hardware engineers and designers that are needed for that. Many of the control systems for quantum computers are actually classical systems. And so we need folks who are trained in the use of lasers, for example. We need people who can write the software. IonQ is a full stack developer. We write our own software, so we also use software engineers. And then, as we've talked about, cybersecurity is a whole other universe because many of the attack surfaces for quantum systems are still not well understood, and there's a ton of work to be done there to understand what all those attack vectors might be for quantum hardware and software.
Terrific. Allison?
I think Lamont is right, and you have to break it down from the computer, the cloud access, what we can do with it, who's going to talk to the customers, who's going to work with the customers. Professional services is another aspect. I am not a quantum physicist. I'm a poli-sci major, and so you need people who can actually translate what's going on in quantum to the folks in the government and the folks that are not technical, but you need folks who do welding. You need folks who do electrical. We do hire a lot of PhDs, but we actually have a huge segment of our employee workforce that are not PhDs. It's somebody who is interested in mathematicians or computer science, algorithm developers, some folks that are looking at AI and looking at the intersection of quantum and AI, and I know we have a panel about that later, or quantum and machine learning. So I have 2 young children, and my son thinks quantum computing is a mother's brain, because I say yes, no, and maybe all at the same time. And my daughter thinks quantum is amazing because somebody built the ultimate Taylor Swift playlist based upon their emotion and could change it. So you can get kids excited about the potentials of quantum, and whether they come in from a sales role to a finance role to a computer electrical engineer, there are places within the quantum ecosystem.
That's like entanglement, when you know that your kid's playing Fortnite in a different room, but you just hear something and you say, no more. They're like, what? How did that happen? Okay. Ryan.
Sure, I'll just add on top of that, when you think about building an ecosystem, yeah, realizing that do we employ a ton of quantum physicists? Absolutely. But we also employ a ton of folks who don't even need a college degree. Going down to the technical and trade school level, we employ a ton of folks who are, again, to Lamont's point, helping with the optics, the lasers, or to the folks who build what are called superconducting quantum systems. These are folks who are welding pieces of machinery and cryogenics that have to be kept at 0 degrees Kelvin, so far colder than outer space. These are really, really interesting, skilled jobs that don't necessarily need to be, certainly don't need to be PhDs, and oftentimes don't even need to be college graduates. So there are a huge swath of jobs for quantum companies. Outside of that, we need companies from across the board who will leverage quantum computing to be able to figure out how do we map our business problems that are either too expensive or simply unsolvable on our current systems, even using AI, to be able to leverage quantum. And so those are folks that also are going to be involved, even if they don't work for a quantum computing company. And to Allison's point, we need people who can translate this. Quantum, as you can see, is really hard to describe. It's very difficult. Einstein called it spooky. Richard Feynman, who's the founder, or essentially the father of quantum computing, said no one actually understands it. We need people who can go to Capitol Hill, who can get on TV, who can talk to students, who can talk to the general public, and make quantum exciting. Let's talk about quantum the way we talked about space in the 50s and 60s. And so just because you are not a science person does not mean you can't work in the quantum industry.
Yeah, I forgot lawyers, too.
Unfortunately.
Oh, Bill, I'm sorry.
I know. I can't believe Allison did that in front of all these people.
Just give them Legos.
Speaking in legal terms, though, Bill, we are in a very gray zone right now around regulation in the quantum industry. What is the policy structure in regulation that you think is going to be necessary for all of this? When we have the actual scale and innovation, how are we going to actually put some guardrails up around it?
So I think that to the point of jobs and careers, regulation and writing smart regulations is going to be a really important part of this, whether it's export issues and allowing scientists at private companies or universities to collaborate with people within friendly nations, but still protecting our IP, still protecting the investment that our government's making or that private companies are making is going to be critical. I think that Capitol Hill realizes that. Certainly investors realize that. So we're not going to be caught off guard, right? Law enforcement needs to be up to speed on this issue too. When you talk about jobs, we have people at the FBI and state law enforcement agencies who need to be facile in this and understand when they're looking at a problem that touches on quantum, when IP is being stolen related to quantum. Those things need to be identified. Those are sort of ancillary jobs to this industry. Everything that touches on it, I think, is going to be impacted, and the broader economy, the broader workforce needs to have understanding of quantum. So I think some of that is going to be regulatory. Some of it, frankly, is going to be mandated in education and school boards and state university curriculum. So I think there'll be a lot of different areas for policy to be enacted throughout.
Allison, quick question. D-Wave is global, and are you seeing like ambiguity with regulatory processes? And if so, can policymakers make some adjustments for optimization?
Yeah, I think the issue is the quantum programs are being implemented in the US differently than the mindset of the quantum programs, let's say, in the UK or in the EU. You know, they are taking an all of the above approach to the different types of qubit architectures and modalities. They're taking an approach into how to invest in the advancements of the hardware as well as developments of applications. The US is really still only focused right now on the hardware and not looking at the application side. So if NQI actually gets reauthorized, that is something that, you know, the Quantum Industry Coalition that Holland Knight helps run has been pushing, and the industry has been pushing for that extra added commercialization. But this really is going to be an allied nation. There are quantum cooperation agreements that the US has with other countries. They're really only international academic exchanges. It's not about commercialization. It's not about building talent that we could bring into our companies or developing applications that they could apply there. Our allies and our adversaries are taking just a different approach.
But as Americans, and whether we're parents, whether we are policymakers, we are hedge fund managers, we are educators, this is all things that need to be brought front and center to people sooner than later, right? Yeah. Okay, moving on to global competition. This is something that I think we've already touched on a few times, and there's been some statistics out there about China. Let's start with, again, aspirational. Partnerships and allies and programs that we're working with, the UK and others about. Lamont, can you talk a little bit about just where the current state of our allegiances are? And then we'll get to the competition.
Sure. So we work obviously very closely with allies around the world. IonQ recently purchased, for example, a company in the UK that required some really serious review from the UK government before they agreed to allow us to purchase them. It comes back to a point that we often make to policymakers on the Hill and in the administration, which is this. It's very important that we, the allies, work closely together on the development of this technology. If the US erects walls around our ability to collaborate with others, it means a couple of things. One, the US becomes a quantum island. And in that instance, then we're going to have to be prepared to write a very large check, right? Because we're going to have to develop this technology all by ourselves. It makes a lot more sense for us to work closely with others to move the science forward. That said, we also have to have an eye toward protecting IP and national security and be smart about where and how we do that.
And Ryan, curious from your vantage, what is the sovereign advantage that the US can have while still collaborating?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that I think the U.S. pretty much undisputedly has the best quantum hardware companies. We are making the most advancements. We spent the most on developing the hardware. We have a very, very strong quantum ecosystem here in the U.S. So when we think about what's happened in the AI field the last several years, I think it's interesting to look at the way Jensen Huang has had conversations with the U.S. government and President Trump lately in terms of when you think about export controls, we want our allies and adversaries alike to be using the U.S. technology stack. We want to create the global standards, and we want to be an exporter of these technologies to the world. I think quantum, we have to put China aside a little bit in that sense, but otherwise it's a similar vein in terms of we've got the best hardware. Let's not erect unnecessary barriers related to export controls, related to tariffs and otherwise. Let's make sure that the world is using U.S. quantum hardware across the basis or across the board, and that we are developing global standards and benchmarks in the U.S. alongside our allies, so you can a little bit more compare apples to apples and make sure that it's U.S. technology that is being used. It's also important to note that no country can do it alone. To Lamont's point about 48 quantum physicists who are U.S. nationals, we need the workforce. Also, a lot of the technology supply chain is not domestic. There is a large amount of cryogenics, optics, and photonics that is foreign, and we're going to have to be able to ensure that that technology, those enabling technologies, can flow into the U.S. and that workforce can come into the U.S. so we can continue to build on our progress, but we cannot do it alone. We need these tech allegiances, which I think the UK piece is a great place to start with that.
I'm inspired.
Hillary, if I could,
Yes,
just for
of
one
course.
second. The issue that you just raised about supply chain, some of these companies are very small, right? And so they're not used to dealing with the government. I think the government needs to be aggressive in looking at companies that are out there that can support this, onshore some of those things to the extent possible, but to really reach out to the business community and try and gather some of those companies that are not typically doing business with the government and make them welcome to that process.
So we've got like 5 more minutes. I want to make sure that each one of you has a moment to come up with one, whether it be policy, program, structural change, something that you feel is the most urgent right now to talk about, and that we can collectively in this room and with all of our networks help push forward. Paul, I'll start with you, and we'll come this way.
I think the U.S. government needs to create a strong buy signal, strong consumption demand for the industry.
Bill?
Well, I think Secretary DeBar, the Deputy Secretary of Commerce, said that we need to have significantly aspirational goals. To those of us in the private sector, that means we've got to come up with really big ideas that the government then, to your point, needs to come out and fund and buy. And just even at the local level, as Mayor James said, he's talking about how quantum can solve some of his government's issues. We need the federal government to do the same.
I think I'll expand on Paul's point, both for the public sector and private sector. It's the demand signal, and it's making sure that you realize that you can't build an ecosystem if you don't have systems. Putting the smartest minds and exposing students, workers to quantum computers is the most important thing we can do, whether that's the U.S. government, national labs procuring quantum systems so that they can build these use cases now and build the workforce, whether that's Palm Beach and the local South Florida community bringing in test beds or smaller quantum systems for students and industry in these types of innovation spaces. You can't have an ecosystem without a system. We need to expand access to quantum computing for students and the workforce alike. That is a national security and economic security issue, and it's both federal, state, and local as well.
I think one aspect is near-term application development. It demystifies what the technology can do and what it can't do. There's legislation in both the House and Senate that's bipartisan called Quantum Sandbox, and it focuses on what quantum computing can build and applications that can be built in 1 to 3 years. And once you start building those demos and you can proof point and provide the ROI, this is what the technology can do, you'll start to see the demand signal into the hardware advancements, because it's no longer a theoretical, we hope 30 years from now. It's, oh wow, we can actually do something like this today.
So there are a number of things I could say with respect to this, but My colleagues here have said it best. When the government buys quantum technology, it becomes a force multiplier. So when the government buys a quantum computer, a quantum company goes out and raises $1 billion in capital to invest in additional development off the strength of that demand signal. If the government isn't buying that quantum hardware and is writing checks to develop the technology, they have to write far larger checks, which is why it makes sense, even if we recognize that not every purchase is going to meet its objectives. They're not all going to be successful. This is difficult technology. If you think of a Falcon rocket, a Falcon 9 rocket, they don't all meet their objectives. Some of them blow up in the sky. But at the end of the day, we've advanced the science and moved the ball down the field. And the same thing is true with quantum investment. This is especially true when we think about Florida and the ecosystem here because of, as you said, a number of you, the pull-through effects. It isn't just about buying the hardware. It's about the people that tend to that hardware. This isn't a Dell server. You don't buy it, stick it in a rack, plug it in, and largely ignore it for its lifespan. Quantum computers require a great deal of engagement at the application layer and with the software and with the folks who maintain and develop those systems. So there's a whole ecosystem play here that goes well beyond the hardware.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just wrap by saying not only the quantum hardware breakthroughs, but the cross-sector synergies that are so important that affect everybody in this room and beyond. So I thank each and every one of you for your time, your expertise, and always being collaborative and creative with us. It's fantastic. I want to thank everyone for listening, and we hope to expand again on this soon. Thank you.